Okay, buckle up because today's deep dive is a wild ride through a legal battle that could completely reshape the media landscape.
Mm.
We're talking Smartmatic versus Newsmax voting machines, a news outlet, and accusations that could cost millions.
Wow.
You sent in a treasure trove of court documents, and let me tell you, this stuff is juicy.
It's a fascinating case that really gets to the heart of how information flows in our society, especially during something as crucial as an election.
Right. We're talking about potential consequences for both election technology and the news organizations covering these incredibly sensitive events.
Yeah.
So for those who missed the headlines, who is Smartmatic and what are they claiming Newsmax did?
So Smartmatic is an election technology company, and they're suing Newsmax for defamation.
Okay.
They claim Newsmax intentionally spread lies about them to boost their ratings after the 2020 U.S. election.
So we're diving headfirst into the messy aftermath of the 2020 election. I knew this one was going to be interesting.
Absolutely.
Oh boy.
Smartmatic claims Newsmax latched onto the misinformation circulating after the election, specifically pushing the narrative that Smartmatic's technology was used to rig the election against Trump. And we're not talking about a single slip-up here. This was a pattern of claims repeated across multiple shows and platforms.
Hold on, I'm getting some serious deja vu vibes from our last deep dive on Dominion voting systems.
Right.
They were involved in the 2020 election too, right?
Good catch. But this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Unlike Dominion, Smartmatic played a very limited role in the 2020 election.
Okay.
They only provided voting machines for Los Angeles County and had nothing to do with counting votes anywhere else in the country.
So Smartmatic is saying Newsmax blew their involvement way out of proportion.
Yeah.
That they were essentially used as a scapegoat in this whole election fraud narrative.
Precisely. And they're not just crying foul. Smartmatic is backing their claims with a mountain of evidence pulled directly from Newsmax.
Okay.
We're talking transcripts from various shows, tweets from anchors, even internal communications, the works.
Okay, now I'm really curious.
Yeah.
What exactly did Newsmax say about Smartmatic? Give me the highlights, the really out there stuff.
Well, get ready for some eyebrow raisers.
Okay.
Newsmax repeatedly implied that Smartmatic's technology was riddled with security flaws and easily manipulated to change votes. They even had guests on their shows who claimed Smartmatic was founded by corrupt Venezuelan dictators specifically to rig elections.
Whoa. Venezuelan dictators. Now that's a conspiracy theory for the books.
You'd think someone at Newsmax would have pumped the brakes on that. Did no one bother to fact-check these claims?
That's a key part of Smartmatic's argument.
Okay.
They're saying Newsmax not only ignored readily available facts, we're talking public statements from election officials and cybersecurity experts,
Right.
but they actively discouraged viewers from believing anything that contradicted their chosen narrative.
So they weren't just reporting on allegations. They were pushing a specific narrative, even when presented with evidence to the contrary. That's bold.
Yeah.
But what did Smartmatic do? Did they immediately lawyer up?
Actually, their first move was surprisingly diplomatic.
Okay.
Smartmatic sent Newsmax a series of letters, very polite, very professional, asking them to retract the false statements.
Okay. They even outlined the inaccuracies and provided supporting documentation like a detailed fact check with receipts.
That almost sounds too reasonable given the circumstances.
Right.
Did Newsmax back down? Issue a mea culpa, maybe?
Not exactly.
Hmm.
Instead of retracting, they doubled down, continuing to feature guests like Dick Morris and Michael Flynn, who were well known for promoting the unfounded narrative of a stolen election.
So they basically threw gasoline on the fire Smartmatic was trying to put out.
Essentially, yes.
Hmm.
And that's a big part of why Smartmatic decided to sue.
Okay.
They're claiming Newsmax deliberately misled the public and trashed their reputation for profit.
Okay, so there's a financial motive for Smartmatic.
Yeah.
But are they just after a big payout? What are they hoping to achieve with this lawsuit?
While financial compensation is part of it, Smartmatic's lawsuit emphasizes the damage done to their reputation and the chilling effect this could have on public trust in election technology as a whole.
Right.
They're not just looking for a payday, they want accountability and to set a precedent for how media outlets cover these crucial events.
It's interesting how this one case touches on so many important issues. Journalistic ethics, the power of misinformation, even the stability of our democratic processes.
It really does highlight the crucial role media plays in our society and the potential consequences when that role is abused. But before we get too deep into the philosophical weeds, let's bring things back to the legal arena. What's Smartmatic's legal strategy here? How can they prove Newsmax is liable for defamation?
Right, because we've got the First Amendment, freedom of the press, all that jazz. It's not illegal to get things wrong, especially when you're reporting on developing events.
Right.
So how does Smartmatic plan to clear that legal hurdle?
That's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
They're not just claiming Newsmax made false statements. They're arguing Newsmax did so with actual malice.
Actual malice. Yeah. Sounds juicy. Break that down for me. What does that even mean in this context?
To prove actual malice, Smartmatic has to convince the court that Newsmax knew the statements about them were false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth.
Okay.
It's a high bar to clear legally, but Smartmatic believes they have the evidence to do it.
So it's not just about proving the statements were false, it's about proving Newsmax's state of mind at the time, that they knew what they were doing was wrong.
You got it. And that's why Smartmatic is dumping a mountain of evidence on the court's doorstep. Transcripts, internal memos, emails. They're trying to create a paper trail that shows Newsmax deliberately ignored facts and chose to push a specific narrative.
It's like they're saying Newsmax wasn't just reporting the news, they were manufacturing it. This is getting good. But what about Newsmax? Surely they're not going down without a fight. What's their defense strategy?
Well, Newsmax is vehemently denying any wrongdoing.
Oh.
They're claiming they were simply doing their job as journalists reporting on claims made by public figures, even if those claims later turned out to be false.
So it's a classic he said, she said situation, but with much higher stakes.
Exactly. And it all hinges on how the court interprets Newsmax's actions. Were they simply reporting on allegations, or were they actively promoting a specific narrative? That's the million-dollar question, quite literally.
Okay, so we've set the stage. Two companies locked in a legal battle with potentially massive ramifications for both the media landscape and the world of election technology. But let's not forget about the human element. What about the people caught in the crossfire of this information war?
You're right. It's easy to get lost in the legal back and forth and forget about the real-world impact of these events.
Yeah.
The court documents themselves paint a pretty harrowing picture of the toll this has taken on Smartmatic and its employees.
We'll dive into those personal stories and unpack the broader implications of this case right after the break. All right, we're back. Before we dove into the human impact of this case, we were talking about Smartmatic versus Newsmax, a legal showdown that's raising some big questions about journalistic ethics and the power of misinformation. And you hinted that there's a human side to this story that often gets overlooked.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the legal arguments and forget that behind all of this are real people whose lives have been deeply affected. Smartmatic employees have faced death threats, online harassment, you name it. The court documents paint a picture of people living in fear, their lives turned upside down by these accusations.
That's heartbreaking. And it's a stark reminder that these aren't just abstract legal concepts we're talking about. These are real-world consequences with the potential to cause real harm.
Exactly. And it's not just Smartmatic employees who are affected. Think about the viewers who rely on Newsmax for information. Some of them might have believed these claims about election rigging, potentially shaking their trust in our democratic processes.
That's a scary thought, that misinformation spread by a news organization could have such a profound impact on people's understanding of something as fundamental as our elections.
It speaks to the immense responsibility news organizations have in a democratic society. They play a vital role in shaping public discourse, and with that power comes a responsibility to ensure accuracy and fairness in their reporting.
Absolutely. But of course, Newsmax isn't the only news organization out there, and this case has sparked a much broader conversation about the media landscape as a whole. Some people argue that a ruling against Newsmax could set a dangerous precedent, making journalists hesitant to report on controversial topics for fear of legal repercussions. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a valid concern. A free and independent press is crucial for a healthy democracy, and we don't want to stifle investigative journalism or create a climate where reporters are afraid to do their job. But at the same time, there needs to be a balance. Spreading demonstrably false information, especially when it comes to something as critical as our elections, has consequences.
So how do we find that balance? How do we hold news organizations accountable for spreading misinformation without infringing on freedom of the press?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. Part of it, I think, comes down to media literacy, educating ourselves and others on how to critically evaluate information, how to identify bias, and how to seek out diverse perspectives.
So it's not just about relying on news organizations to get it right. It's about being more active and discerning consumers of information ourselves.
Exactly. We can't just passively absorb whatever's thrown at us. We have to be willing to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to seek out information from a variety of sources.
That sounds like a tall order, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides. But I think you're right. It's more important than ever to be critical thinkers, especially when it comes to something as important as our democracy.
Absolutely. And this case, with all its complexities and nuances, highlights that importance.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal arguments, the ethical dilemmas, the impact on individuals, and the broader implications for journalism and democracy. What happens next? What are the potential outcomes of this case?
Well, the big question is whether Smartmatic can convince the court that Newsmax acted with actual malice. If they succeed, Newsmax could be ordered to pay a hefty sum in damages, potentially millions, even billions of dollars.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Right.
But I'm guessing a financial penalty wouldn't be the only consequence, right?
You're right. A ruling against Newsmax could have far-reaching consequences for the media landscape as a whole. It could lead to stricter reporting standards, increased scrutiny of election coverage, and potentially even a wave of similar lawsuits from individuals or organizations who believe they were defamed by media outlets.
So this case could have a ripple effect, potentially changing the way news is reported and consumed.
It's certainly possible, but it's important to remember that this is just one case, and the legal battle is far from over. Newsmax is putting up a vigorous defense, and there are strong arguments to be made on both sides.
You're right. This is a complex issue with no easy answers. But one thing's for sure. The Smartmatic Newsmax case has ignited a conversation that extends far beyond the courtroom. It's a conversation about the role of media in our society, the power of misinformation, and our individual responsibility to be informed and engaged citizens.
Well said. And that conversation, I think, is just as important as the legal battle itself.
Absolutely. So we've unpacked the legal arguments, the potential outcomes, and the broader societal implications of this case. But before we wrap things up, I'm curious, are there any other similar cases out there? Has anyone else taken legal action against news organizations for spreading election-related misinformation?
You're on top of it. This isn't an isolated incident. Remember Dominion Voting Systems, the company we mentioned earlier?
Right, the one that also provided voting machines for the 2020 election.
Exactly. They filed similar defamation lawsuits against Fox News, Rudy Giuliani, and Sidney Powell, alleging that these entities knowingly spread false claims about their voting machines being used to rig the election.
So it sounds like Smartmatic and Dominion are fighting a similar battle on different fronts.
They are. And these are just the cases that have made it to the headlines. There are likely many other individuals and organizations who are considering similar legal action, or who have already taken steps to protect their reputations from the damage caused by election-related misinformation.
It's a reminder that the battle against misinformation isn't just playing out in the court of public opinion, it's happening in courtrooms across the country.
And the outcomes of these cases could have a profound impact on the future of journalism, the way we consume information, and even the very fabric of our democracy.
This deep dive has been quite a journey. From voting machines to misinformation to the future of our democracy. We've covered a lot of ground. But before we get too lost in the weeds, let's take a step back and revisit the key takeaways from this case.
Good idea. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the legal jargon and the complexities of the arguments, but it's important to remember what's at stake here.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Smartmatic Newsmax case, what are the key points you want our listener to walk away with? So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Smartmatic Newsmax case, what are the key points you want our listener to walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway here is the importance of being informed and engaged citizens, especially when it comes to something as crucial as our elections. We can't just rely on news organizations, social media, or any single source for information. We have to be willing to dig deeper, to question what we hear, and to seek out diverse perspectives.
It's like that old saying, trust but verify. It feels more relevant than ever in today's world.
Absolutely. We have access to more information than ever before, but that also means there's more misinformation circulating than ever before. It's on us to be discerning consumers of information, to be critical thinkers who can identify bias, evaluate sources, and form our own informed opinions.
It's about taking responsibility for our own information diets, right? Not just passively accepting whatever's put in front of us.
Exactly. And that means being proactive, seeking out reliable sources, engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold different viewpoints, and being open to challenging our own assumptions.
Easier said than done, right? It's easy to get stuck in our own echo chambers, surrounded by information that confirms our existing beliefs.
You're right. It takes conscious effort to break out of those bubbles. But the alternative, a society increasingly divided by misinformation and distrust, is a price we can't afford to pay.
It's a reminder that democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires active participation from all of us, and that includes being informed citizens who can engage in these critical conversations.
Well said. And this case, for all its complexities and nuances, really drives that point home. It's a stark reminder of the power of misinformation, the importance of a free and independent press, and the role we all play in safeguarding truth and integrity in our democratic processes.
This deep dive has been quite a journey, and I think we've all learned a lot about the legal system, journalistic ethics, and the challenges facing our democracy in the digital age. Any final thoughts for our listener before we sign off?
Stay curious, stay critical, and stay engaged. The battle against misinformation is an ongoing one, and it requires all of us to be informed, discerning, and engaged citizens.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's always a pleasure picking your brain.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listener, thanks for diving in with us today. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into a topic that's sure to make you think.